I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker today, which is Michael Yale. Hopefully I pronounced your last name right.
You did.
But Michael has been an advocate for single dads for over 10 years and has been an expert on grief and loss counseling from emotional trauma for over 30 years. He's been a teacher for 16 years, grew up as a child of a divorced and raised his own son as a single dad. And Mike has years of firsthand experience as well as observations in his classroom of single dads struggling to be a proactive single dad. He currently sits on the advisory board of Rainbows for All Children. And if you didn't know, this session is Society and Single Dads. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Michael. I will be monitoring the chat. If there are any questions anybody has, you can always post them there and we can catch them up as we go through the presentation.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining me. And hopefully the technology glitches on my end will be minimal or non-existent. I'm coming to you from Chicago area, lifelong resident of Illinois. And one other quick correction, and I apologize, Andrew, for not getting back to you from your email. It's been a long week for myself. I taught for 16 years. I stopped teaching about 5 years ago. Got into what I'm doing now and doing some other things to keep moving forward with my advocacy for single dads. So let me see if this will work. I'm going to see, let's see, share. I'm hoping. Can everybody see that?
Yep, we're seeing your PowerPoint.
Perfect. All right, perfect. So a little bit about myself. I'm 56 years old. I became a single dad when I was 21, got married at age 49, raised my son as a single dad. He actually moved in with me full time he's 10, so that was 5th or 6th grade, around middle school. Then all through high school, all through college. Now my son is 34 years old. Taught for 16 years, both intermediate and middle school. And I did grant writing for quite a number of years for 501c3 companies, more specifically for where I'm currently on the advisory board at Rainbows for All Children. And my life started at age 16 and doing workshops. Going to different venues. It was actually called Grief on the Go, and it was a bunch of teenage kids going out to different venues, explaining their pain of what they experienced and went through when their parents either lost their parent through death or divorce, which was the main function back in the mid to late 70s and throughout the 80s. And of course, now we're in 2021, and of course that grief process and that tragic loss and emotional trauma has now expanded much past just those two ways of becoming a single parent. I founded Single Dads online in 2007, and one of the reasons why I created the company was I knew what my dad went through when my parents split. I was 10 years old when my mom and dad divorced. And there wasn't a lot out there for single parents in general, let alone how to parent from two households. And I watched my dad struggle trying to fit the norms of what the court said you should do, what he felt he should do as a father, but at the same time struggling because there was nothing out there for single parents, specifically single dads. It was just assumed that the kids would live with the mother and then the dads would get visitation. And then fast forward to when I became a single dad at 21, 1987, a lot of those stigmas were still out there, which really shocked me that divorcing and becoming single parents had grown exponentially from the 70s into the 80s. And here we are going into the 90s, and a lot of those stigmas still existed. So I said, there's got to be some changes. We've got dads out there who want to be active in their children's lives and just don't know how, or they're so frustrated with the system or frustrated on how they felt they've been treated, whether it be the courtrooms, by their ex-spouse. Sometimes families go at each other with the in-laws and other family members, sparring with each other, putting the kids in the middle, and they get to a point where they throw up their hands and they leave. And of course, you've got the fathers out there who just make that choice not to do it. And so I started this as a way to try and engage fathers to be more proactive in their children's lives. to bite that bullet, to move forward, to get past where you needed to be as a dad, just trying to function from day to day. So today's workshop is focused more on society and single dads. And within this workshop today, we're going to talk about who are the single dads, the impact that of absent dads are having on their children. We'll touch briefly on the COVID-19 impact on visitation. I've been fielding over the last 18 months many calls about not being able to see their children, or their ex-spouse not letting them see their children because of the whole COVID-19 situation. Why dads are being disengaged, and that stereotype of Disneyland dad when we do get our children for those brief moments of time, trying to make it all fun and games, and really what that does in the long run. If you have any questions, I don't see my chat thing here. Hold on a second. Whoops, go back. Andrew, if you see questions pop up, because for whatever reason, I'm not seeing the chat, just, feel free to interrupt me and let me know. I'll try and stop in between some of these slides to see if there are any questions.
Sure, no problem.
All right, how does one become a single dad? It's real simple. It's either a choice or it's not a choice. And those choices would be: you get divorced, you're unwed, foster, adopt children. You make that choice to do this as a single parent. The not a choice simply is military deployment, the death of your spouse gets incarcerated, or the parent just simply abandons the family and moves on. So within those two choices, we can sit and debate, really what is the choice and not a choice. These are just the basics. But when you make that choice, even under the best of circumstances, transitioning into a single parent household isn't easy. Even if you and your ex-spouse are in agreement that this is the best thing for our family and we're going to try and make this as amiable as possible, that transition still becomes difficult, because you're going from 24/7, 365 in a household with your children and somebody to help raise your children. And now that's all changing to where, while you still might be co-parenting, it's from two different households. There's two perceptions for single dads. In public, you tell your friends and your family and your coworkers and people you encounter, I'm seeing my kids on a regular basis. You might even do some trash talking of the other parent in front of your friends, coworkers, maybe even the new person you're dating, the new partner. May also complain about how divorce proceedings are going, how much it's costing. But overall, things are great. I'm participating whenever I can. My kids love me. They're handling this just great. And then in private, it's more, there's nowhere to turn. I'm starting over and I don't know where to begin. It's just difficult. It's unfair because you might be the one that has to move out. You're not in the house. You're missing your children because you're not seeing them every day. You're paying child support. I feel like I'm the bad guy, no matter how that loss occurred. And I'll be honest with you, even though it's getting a little bit better, a lot of the court systems still treat the dad as the bad guy in the situation, even though the circumstances of the divorce may not happen. You're the bad guy because maybe your ex-spouse is not in the life because they are deployed or they have passed away, and now you're the sole parent, and your kids are angry with you because you're being the parent all the time. The feeling of hopelessness. There might have been an income situation where you're not earning the money you were once earning, going from two incomes down to one. You're not feeling that support. You're feeling just completely isolated, like you're the only one going through there. The added expenses to being a single parent. When you're cohabitating in a house, you're sharing those expenses. Now they're all there and it's all on you. The struggle to integrate back into your children's lives as a single dad. Again, you came home all the time, your kids were there. Now it might be every other weekend. You might get them for a 2-week period during the summer. It's just a lot of change. And in private, we have that feeling of, how do I handle this? But in public, everything is great. Why do we hide that vulnerability when we are being out there in public and people are asking us how things are going? That stereotype of just be a man, suck it up and deal with it, put on that poker face and move forward. Society as a whole doesn't permit long-term grieving. When you are going into a single parent situation, that is an emotional trauma and you are grieving. You are feeling that loss of that of being on your own and that loss of not seeing your kids on a regular basis. But society doesn't allow it. We just want to fix it with a pill. Hey, you've had a month. It's time to move on. It doesn't work that way. You try to treat single parenting as kind of like a business transaction. Okay, I'm divorced. I've got custody of my kids. I don't have custody of my kids. I pay child support, go through the court system. And it's just, you try and mentally put it as a business transaction instead of an emotional change. And then sometimes some dads end up moving away to take on a job that at least will pay the bills. Sometimes that might be another state. Sometimes that might be several hours away. Sometimes that might be even another country. And with COVID-19 that popped in there, we add that in there. Now we're going into virtually seeing our children. So that we hide the vulnerabilities for many different reasons. And when we're grieving as an adult and your children are also grieving, we got to keep in mind a couple of quick things. There's no medical diagnosis to confirm you're grieving. There's no set time frame to grieve. It takes as long as it takes, but rest assured, if you don't work yourself and you help your children work through the grieving process, you never get through it. You get stuck in that one component of it, and you relive things like it just happened yesterday. While some doctors and experts might want to prescribe medications to kind of keep everything moving forward, understand that it's only treating a symptom of the grief. It's not removing the grief. So while it might help you be more emotionally stable, more focused, moving forward, it's not helping you work through that pain of that loss. There's not a single experience that you can look back at that prepares a dad or even a mom for that matter, being a single parent, that pain of that loss, regardless of what the loss is. There's not, you can think about, well, I lost my grandmother, or, myself, my parents divorced when I was 10. When I became a single dad, I'll go back to what I did when I remember when I was a kid. You still are going through that grief. There are some experts out there that want to diagnose grief as a disorder. I'm not convinced that that's the right solution. As society does not permit long-term grief, I see that as a continual problem for single dads and anybody else working through it as, okay, it's got to stop and it's got to move on. I remember one time with my dad. My parents have been divorced probably 20 plus years, and I was in my 20s. And my brothers wanted to talk to my dad about some issues that they were thinking and feeling when my parents divorced. Now we're all pretty much adults now. And my dad comes up to me all angry and upset, saying, that was over a long time ago. I've moved on. I'm not talking about it. And I looked at him, I said, Dad, you can't not talk about it. It happened. And, your sons, my brothers, still have questions. And you have to be willing to answer those. And all those questions that would come at my dad or my mom have to be answered as that parent. We have to always be that parent and know that no matter when those questions come to us from our children, we have to be prepared to answer them. And understand what the grief process, as we hit those milestones, sometimes some of that grieving may come back because it might trigger a memory. It might trigger an emotional response. As you mature, you rethink some things that you thought about as a kid, but now as an adult, I wanted some clarification. As a parent, as a dad, we have to be able to answer those questions. We have to be able to work through it, to help our children work through it. If we as adults are not prepared to grieve, then what does that say about our children? What does that say if we're not willing to work through it? What does it say about our children? Absent dads truly do not grieve and hinder the grieving process of their children. And I think the latter part of that statement is more important: hinder the grieving process of their children. So while we may be in control of what we want to do, our thinking and our feeling and how we're going to work through things, our children need our guidance, and they need to be able to work through that process. Grief is simply this: it's emotional based. And a lot of research has been done to show that emotional stability is linked to our cognitive decisions. It's an essential ingredient for creating good memories or bad memories. I've often used in some live workshops, I've done a little activity where your life is a backpack. And in that backpack, you store all of your experiences you've had in your life. And a quick example would be the first time you fell and skinned your knee. You ran home in tears, maybe a little bit of blood. It hurts. Your mom or your dad set you on the counter, wiped off the knee, cleaned it up, put a Band-Aid on it, kissed you on the head, gave you a cookie, and you went on. Well, you took that experience and you put that in your backpack. So the next time you fell and skinned your knee, you did one of two things. You accommodated the situation or you simulated the situation. Accommodated and simulated, you'd say, okay, now I know how to fix my knee. Or you went back, get that cookie and get that Band-Aid. But when you experience an emotional trauma, such as a death or divorce or an abandonment of that parent, it's like an exploded pen in your backpack. It just taints everything. Everything is now the color of that pen. So if you have a memory, a good memory, now that you have that grief going on in your world, all of a sudden that memory's tainted. It's now not necessarily a good memory, it's a bad memory, and it creates an emotional response. That unresolved grief tarnishes those past memories and will tarnish every memory going forward. Our rationale and emotional brain structure can discover no appropriate solution to a threatening solution. When it comes to the emotions of the heart, no matter how old we are, we're still little kids inside. Think about when you lost a mom or dad as an adult, when they passed away, or maybe they have a debilitating illness, and that happens, the pain and the emotion we have inside. My mother died in 2013, quite suddenly from pancreatic cancer. She was diagnosed Christmas Eve, died 3 weeks later. And you would have thought the pain I was feeling, I was 5 years old all over again. And in some respects, even though it's now 2021, there's still aspects of my grieving process for my mother that I'm still trying to work through. So if you think in the back of your head that when you are emotionally distraught through a traumatic loss, it's like you're just that little kid in there is just trying to figure it all out. So I'm going to quick ask a true or false question. Your brain can differentiate between physical and emotional danger. Give yourself a couple of seconds and figure out. Differentiate between physical and emotional danger. Difference between somebody putting you in danger physically or somebody putting you in danger emotionally. So give yourself a couple of seconds to think about that. So does anybody want to be brave enough to take a gander, whether it's true or false?
I'll say it's true, but I could be wrong.
All right, well, survey said it's false. It is false. There was a book I read as a teacher by Robert Slewester. It's called Celebrating Neurons. And we were given to it as a teacher so we could help understand a child's brain as they learn. And I'm like, oh, great, I'll read that book. And they were just starting to map the brain at this time. They were just starting to do that. And this statement from the book is what put this all into focus with me as a single parent. So since most of our contemporary stress results from emotional problems, our stress responses are often maladaptive. Therefore, out of this book, our stress mechanisms do not differentiate between physical and emotional danger. So if somebody puts a gun to your head and said, give me all your money or I'm going to kill you, is the same emotional feeling you have when you hear your parents say, mom and dad are getting divorced. And you think that might be a little hard to believe, but because we, go back thousands of years, it was a lot of fight and flight. Well, what's happened is a lot of that fight and flight hasn't over the centuries and the millennia is still within us, but now it's maladaptive to where both emotional and physical trauma can give us the same emotional response. Now, there are a lot of socioeconomic areas that some of that fight or flight is still very much in existence, but the fact to know that our brain emotionally responds the same way to whether it's a physical harm or an emotional harm. So Jackie, thanks for at least being brave enough to answer, but I'll be honest with you, 99% of the time, most people answer it that way because we think that we should be able to know the difference. But when it comes to our emotions, we at this point in our human development, we're not there. So real quick, and you can read this on your own, But one of the reasons why I do what I do, trying to get dads to be more proactive, is look at the statistics of what's happening. 68% of children in the US experience a loss before their 18th birthday, 50 million kids a year. 20% can have learning and emotional behaviors due to changing family systems, and they're dramatically changing. 50% of the children will experience divorce. 50% of them will experience a second divorce. 5% of these children experience death of one or both parents. And it just goes on. 86%, and I know this as being a teacher myself, 86% of teachers don't have grief training, but yet 69% report having students in their classroom struggling with grief and loss. And when I was teaching, it was more around 50%. But if you are a teacher, or you ask your kids, or you talk, you'll know. But in the file system, it's not there. The only time you see something in their file is if there's some sort of custody arrangement, or making sure that the non-custodial parent gets the report card, the newsletters, scheduling conferences. That's usually how you find out. So there's usually nothing in the file. Now, every school district's different. I'm only speaking from my personal experience, but the statistics are out there. They don't have the training on how to work with it. And some students can be straight A and grieving, and some kids are failing and they're grieving. And again, I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but again, typically 84% of the children reside with their mother still. A lot of times in the court system, it's not a matter of who the best parent is. It's just a matter of how well ultimately they'll be better with the mom. Now, some court systems are going into 50-50 joint custody because they're rating it on child support. So if you see your kids 50% of the time, this is what your child support will be. If you're seeing your kids 20% of the time, this is what your child support will be. So from a mathematical or an analytical standpoint, that makes sense. But then what ends up happening is then you have that non-custodial parent saying, I want my children 50% of the time. So it does become problematic in the long run. And we'll talk a little bit more about the living arrangements a little bit later. Parents and dads, the best advice is not always, or the advice you give is not always the best advice. Don't tell your children you'll get over it. Don't tell your children crying won't help. You need to be strong. You need to be strong for your mom. You need to be strong for your dad. You need to be strong for your brothers and sisters. It's time to move on. It's been 6 months. It's been a year. You're too young to understand. Even the youngest of children can have the basic understanding that things have changed. So don't underestimate the 5-year-old when trying to explain why mommy's not coming home or why daddy moved out. You just make it age appropriate and then give them that answer to the question. Prescription medication is not the cure. We'll put them on pills until they feel better. You take them off that medication, potentially there are problems. I am not a medical doctor. I am not a psychiatrist, but medicating something for emotional trauma is not a long-term solution. Additional cliches, grief and mourning are the same experience. They're really not. Adults have all the answers. You do not have all the answers. Dads, you do not have all the answers. Moms, you do not have all the answers. And a lot of time, sorry for the football cliche, sometimes you have to drop back 10 and punt. And okay, I haven't experienced this. How do we do this? One of the biggest things my mom did for us was she made a huge bowl of popcorn, sat me and my brothers down on the living room floor, and just started having a conversation. And she said to us later when we were adults, she didn't know that was going to explode in her face or it was actually going to be productive. An adult's grief does not affect your child. It is so misleading. If you're in pain, your kids are in pain. Right? And sometimes it's called misplaced anger or misplaced responsibility. Sometimes your kids take responsibility for why mom and dad didn't get back, got divorced, whether that be because they heard them arguing over their grades or they didn't clean their room. If mom died, they got angry and said, I wish my mom was dead. Bam, and it happened. So there's a lot of things in there that you have to make sure that, your choices about how you express the grief and loss, that you make sure that you include your child in part of your own grieving. Adults should avoid topics that cause crying and other emotional release. No, that's not true. Maybe in public, it might not be the best thing to talk about, but you got to make sure you revisit that when you have some time. Additional cliches. I'm sorry that my voice keeps cracking. I must be going through a second level of adolescence. I apologize. A child that still plays is not grieving. Children, just like adults, go through their routines as best they can, play their sports. Some, like I said, some get straight A's, or maybe they were C students and all of a sudden they get straight A's. Infants and toddlers are too young to understand. They're really not. It's amazing if you watch your young kids and their drawings, how their drawings change when there's an emotional trauma. And sometimes the color variations change to a darker color. The pictures may be more negative. So don't just assume because they're so little they'll never go through it. My youngest brother was, let's see, I was 10. So my youngest brother was 5 at the time my parents split. My mom told me the story at 18. He went and talked to my mom and felt that it was his fault that my mom and dad got divorced. And my mom, what made you think that? And he went into his rationale of why he thought that possibly he could have been responsible for my parents getting divorced. So you can't just assume that because they're young, that they're not going to remember, or they're not going to process it, or it's not going to bother them. You can't assume that. Children need just to forget about it. That is an old statement where you don't talk about it and it doesn't exist. It's not effective. More and more studies are now showing that emotional trauma is impacting our children's choices with their friends, their grades, things that they do. There's a psychologist out there, Jean-Claude Piaget, and just simply put, feels that his theory is human beings need to have that balance. They have to have a balance in their life. If they don't have that balance, they look for other things to create that balance. And sometimes those other things are not healthy choices to create that balance. As adults, it's, you might be a shopaholic. You might increase alcohol or drug consumption, go through multiple partners. Children will find the same way to find that balance, especially if they don't feel that they can talk to anybody. If you lost your spouse to death, children shouldn't attend the funeral services. You know what? They should attend the funeral services. Attending a wake, if your spiritual beliefs or beliefs do that, that'll be a decision that you might need to talk to your children about, but they got to be part of that process that helps them with the closure and working through the grief process. A lot of times, if there is a death in the family, just, for the sake of this discussion, mom dies and the ashes are spread over the ocean or in a favorite place they'd like to be. Well, now you don't have a place for your kids to come and grieve or quote unquote visit their mom. They don't have a grave site. They don't have there's nothing for them to say, I want to go talk to mom. We need that understanding, that physical connection, that we can go someplace to see that parent, even though it might be a cemetery. And with my mom, I still go to the cemetery and chat with her. I still go there. When I go, my dad's buried in Kansas City. When I go visit in Kansas City, I still go to the cemetery. And now my grandparents, I was fortunate enough to have both sets of grandparents until I was 55 years old or 54 years old. My grandfather just died a year ago at 96, great the life that he lived. And then I'm going to get back there this year and see that. We need that. Children especially need it. They feel like they can go there. Maybe they made a card or a picture they want to put on the gravestone. They just need that interaction. So if that happened where you had your spouse cremated and the ashes have been put someplace, then create a memory area either in the yard or someplace, and that becomes the place for your child to be able to visit their mom. Children work through their grief just like you're working through their grief. They understanding it, encouraging to work through it, commemorating the loss with memories and things that they remember that was fun, and trying to move on. No parent wants to admit that their choices are hurting their kids. And I think that's one of the hardest things I had to focus on when I made the choice to become a single dad. And I'm holding my son, son's in a hospital bed, and I'm holding his hand. And I it was implying it was critical, but at the same time, I'm holding his hand and I'm saying, you know what, this is not your fault. And I have to belly up and I have to make this work. Your choices that we have to endure, work through the loss on two fronts. from the parent's perspective and your children. And the children are the bigger, that's where the avoidance. Neither of these are easy on the short term. So as you talk about loss from a parent perspective or from your children's perspective, it's going to be a bumpy road. Real quickly on COVID. Now, I am not here to pass judgment. I'm here to pass facts, but I've been dealing with a lot of fathers emailing me, not being able to see their kids, either because they're not vaccinated, he's not vaccinated. Statistics are statistics. And now with the variant that's out there, more and more children are getting sick, more and more children are dying. So it is impacting our children. Okay. So I'm just presenting you with the facts. All right. That's all I'm doing. And then you make your, hopefully your decisions will be made based on what you're getting. But understand that even if you choose not to be vaccinated or choose not to mask or however you do it, just remember that virus comes in and even though the child might be fine, might have asymptomatic, that virus can be spread to older adults. So grief happens normal, and then there's serious issues. Real quick, normal, shock, whereas if there's a more serious emotional issue, total denial of what happened. Loss of appetite, might not want to be eating dinner, maybe not that hungry, pick at their food, versus an eating disorder. Normal grieving is restless sleep, may not sleep well. If you have younger kids, they might even crawl into bed with you. Serious issues with nightmares and will not sleep alone. They become more withdrawn versus isolation, irritable and cranky versus physical aggression or reacting to violence. You'll notice this with your children a lot. I've got a headache, I don't feel real well, versus there is some sort of psychosomatic illness and you're taking them to somebody to help work through it. Decline and increase in grades. It's pretty interesting what I've seen over the years. Sometimes kids will knuckle down and to avoid the pain, go right into their classwork and all of a sudden get straight A's and B's, and giving the false hope to that parent, everything's fine. My kid's fine. He's getting straight A's. He's playing sports. She's doing activities. Everything is fine. And then you have the polar opposite where they just can't focus anymore. But if they drop out of school or they're getting expelled from school, then there's a deeper underlying issue that's going on. Discipline problems is a difference between your kids not doing their chores or hitting their brother or sister, or maybe acted out in school, versus getting in trouble with the law and gang activity and drug and alcohol abuse and promiscuous sexual activity. You've got to look at what is normal behavior and what is serious. And think about when you were kids growing up, whether or not you experienced that loss in your life, things that you did when you lost somebody close to you, even a pet. And think about that, or you lost a grandma or grandpa, or just plain adolescence and, I'm right, everybody else is wrong. Within the Society of Single Dads, why are so many dads choosing to be absent? And there's many perceptions out there. Some just basic ones that are here is the court system. Now, if you've ever had to go through the court system, especially for divorce or custody, the court system sucks the life out of you until there's nothing left. And a lot of times dads just settle. I just want to settle and be done. I'm done. I can't afford it anymore. I'm being labeled as the bad guy through this whole thing. I just want it to be done. Church and the children's schools are talking, they feel that they're talking behind their back, truly not supportive. There's no self-esteem. If you're religious and you go to church, how do I go back to that church with my children now that I'm divorced? There's so much on my plate. When is there time for me and or my kids? So a lot of times the answer for many single dads is it's just time to go. They'll be better off without me. I just need to walk away. My dad, 6 months, he stopped calling. He stopped coming over for, pick us up for the weekend, wouldn't communicate with my mom what was going on. And back in the 70s, no internet, no email, no text messaging, no cell phones, and answering machines were in their infancy. So unless you were at work and there might be an answering machine or a secretary, when you go home, the phone just rings and rings and rings, or you get a constant busy signal. So those of you that are a little bit younger than I am, that might all sound like foreign things to you, but in the 70s, you couldn't have access to family members like you do today. And my dad went 6 solid months. And he said, after he started coming around again, I just needed time to myself. And the whole time I'm thinking, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong that my dad stopped talking to me? I'd call his work. The secretary would take a message. He'd never return the call. Never did. I even at one point accused my mom that he was calling, but she wasn't telling us that he called. So 6 months. Now imagine take 6 months and what I just explained to you from my personal experience and put that into years, what your kids are thinking or feeling. Dads, I'm going to tell you, you're not alone when there's a lot on your plate and feeling victimized. Understand that even though it may seem lopsided, that it seems like everything's going well for your ex-spouse, or it seems like everybody else seems to be having it, even though my spouse has been deployed or passed away, everybody has it easier. The good and the bad of grief is nobody can experience what you're feeling. And while you can say to somebody can say to you, hey, you're one of millions out there that are experiencing the same thing. Yeah, that's true. But emotionally and from that pain perspective, we're the only ones that are feeling it. If you're having battling issues with the ex-spouse, and I know this is easier said than done, the whole idea is to try and be a proactive co-parent. And sometimes that doesn't happen. You want to make sure that as that co-parent, you want to be tried and true in your discipline, tried and true in your explanations without bashing your ex-child. Even if your ex-spouse, even if your child comes up to you and says, well, mommy says that you're a deadbeat. That doesn't mean you throw that next zinger. Well, you tell your mom this. Take the high road and just have an answer. Well, your mom and I are going to agree to disagree. I don't believe that I am a deadbeat. I'm doing the best I can. And I'm sorry that your mom feels that way. You can try and have a conversation with your ex-spouse and say, look, you don't need to be telling our children that. If you have a problem with me, talk to me. That really should be the adults. If you go with the rule of thumb, shooting an arrow or an insult into your ex-spouse goes through the heart of your children first before it hits your ex-spouse. Also remind you that children are not bulletin boards. Make sure your dad, make sure your mom pays her child support. Make sure you tell your mom you got a test next. Talk to the parent. Now with email and texting, there are ways to communicate without having to physically talk to them. But at some point, it's what's in the best interest in the relationship of your children and the best interest in the relationship between you and your children. What are the needs of single parents and single dads? We are human beings. We need love, food, housing, clothing, security, sleep, and communication. It doesn't change now that you become a single dad. Our dignity and worth is not being affirmed. And that happens a lot, especially when we're in the middle of it and it's all brand new. Okay, we take the dignity and we feel this big and it's not being affirmed. Forgiveness is not being cultivated. And you can take that however you want to go. You're not being forgiven for the loss. You're being punished because my spouse died. Even if the reason for the divorce was a choice that you made, you have the right to be forgiven and to move forward. We always hear people that you should get a second chance, second chances. Well, you know what? We make mistakes. I became a single dad as an unwed father. I chose not to marry his mother. So does that make me a bad guy? At the time, probably it did. But I have to move forward and be the best single dad I can be. And then our faith tends to be put on the back burner. If you have faith, you're going to need that. You're going to need that grounding and to move forward to get back active in the church. Nobody is perfect. I have yet to meet that perfect person yet. If any of you on the panel here today have met that perfect person, please let me know. But we're not perfect. We all make mistakes. All we can do is learn from those mistakes and make a proactive choice going forward. The term Disneyland Dad. Disneyland is a great place to be and a great place to visit. And the term Disneyland Dad, if you haven't heard it before, is the term that is used when you feel the need to impress your kids with nothing but fun, expensive opportunities, buy them whatever they want, take them wherever they go, and everything is about fun. And this happens a lot because you don't see your children on a regular basis. So we as single dads tend to overcompensate with that. And we just want to make it a weekend full of fun. And that's all that happens. We're going to go see a movie. We're going to go out to dinner. We're going to go on vacation. We're going to, one dad said that every year their child come up to him and say, hey, the new Air Jordans are out. I need you to go buy me a pair. And he would go do it. Now, Air Jordans were $200-300 pairs of shoes, maybe even more. I never owned a pair, never bought a pair. And those are expensive, especially when you have children that are going to, are going to outgrow them within 6 months to a year. And it's like, I got a $300 pair of shoes that I have to donate. So we have to remember, it's not always about the fun, to keep your kids distracted and keep the situation in denial. You have to be a parent with that balance. It has nothing to do with about having fun with your kids. I'm not saying don't have fun with your children. You can do that, but find the balance. Dads go from seeing their kids daily, sometimes only once a week, maybe even bi-weekly. Sometimes, depending on where they live, it might be, only during the summer months. Being a Disneyland dad sometimes means you missing those routines. You no longer have them do chores. There's no bedtime. There's no boundaries. They can do what they want. As a parent, you have to still have those things. Yes, you don't want it to be a negative experience because you only have them for 3 short days or 4 short days or maybe even a few hours, but you still have to be the parent. They still have chores, bedtime boundaries, all are preparation for things they need to handle when they become an adult. So not only are you depriving them of helping them become an older person and eventually an adult, but now you're taking away things that now fall on your shoulders. So you don't have them do chores. So that means you're always mowing the lawn. You're always cleaning the bathrooms. You're always dumping the trash. You're always feeding the pets. Your kids need to learn that. Even the youngest of children can learn how to clean a litter box. Disneyland dads tend to overcompensate for the loss. So they're crying, your child is crying because they're upset that the loss occurred. So what's the answer? I'll go buy them something because that'll make them happy. It's very easy to avoid uncomfortable discussions about the loss. But as a parent, dads, we have to buckle down and do it. And sometimes it can get pretty heated. It can get pretty emotional, tears on both ends. But remember, from the child's perspective or what they might have heard from their friends, sadly, if there's no restrictions on the internet, what they're finding on the internet, it's your responsibility to take those uncomfortable discussions, make them age appropriate, and have them. Okay. Parenting versus being a friend. Disneyland tends to always want to be the friend. You are a parent first. You are their friend second. When they are adults, you transition from parenting to friendship, but you're still the parent. When I was in middle school, teaching middle school, we used to do these middle school dances. A bunch of 6th grade parents didn't want their kids to attend the dance because they felt they were too young, not emotionally developed, mentally not ready for it. They didn't want them to go. So they wanted me to take that component out of those middle school dances. Middle school is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So I simply said to them, I said, well, if you don't want them to go, then tell them they can't go. Oh, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to be the bad guy. We want you to do it so we can, so you can be the bad guy. I'm not your child's parent. If you don't want them to go, you tell them they can't go. And peer pressure is peer pressure, and I get it. And how many times have you heard as a parent, well, Sally's mom doesn't let her do that, or Johnny's dad doesn't let him do that. My parents' response is, well, I'm not Johnny's dad, and I'm not Sally's mom. So you've got to be the parent first and then be their friend. You don't want to compete with other parents, step parents, the new partner. That's not what it's about. Don't compete. Whether you are you do construction and the stepdad or the new parent is a neurosurgeon, it doesn't matter. Your kids love you unconditionally, so it's not a competition. Okay, Disneyland dads tend to send the wrong message. You're sending the message of, I'll buy you stuff, I'll take you places, I'll do anything you want, and everything is good. Instead of being a parent, taking the good with the bad and teaching those life lessons. You can cause additional friction for your ex-spouse because the ex-spouse now becomes the parent and has to be the disciplinarian and has to do all the negative things, while going over to dad's house is always a bunch of fun. So you've got to find that balance. Again, I'm not saying you can't take your kids on vacation. Of course you can. You just have to find the balance in it. Make it not, don't let that pendulum go one direction or the other. Try and keep that middle ground. Finding the balance is everything you want to do in parenting. And that's all we do. It's a tightrope walk. You can read as many books as you want. There are more and more books out there about being single dads than there was before. And you got to find that balance because each person, it's unique under those circumstances. Dads can survive their loss with their kids when your children receive prompt and accurate information about what has happened and allowed to ask those questions age appropriate. Now, remind you, your children have access to the internet. They might be Googling some stuff. Sadly, they might have access to chat rooms you don't know about. You've got to make sure that you are aware of where they're getting their information and making sure they discuss it. For my generation, it was the rock and roll and the music and the lyrics that needed to be discussed. Now with social media and everything, it's even harder for a parent to track where their kids are getting that information. But you want to make sure that you prompt the discussion and get that information accurate. Sometimes it just might be friends, they have a peer that might have a similar situation and they're discussing how their mom or their dad is handling things. Might not be the way you would handle them. So make sure it's an age appropriate discussion. Their questions should be answered honestly and age appropriately. There are elements of my mom and dad's divorce I to this day, and I won't because they're both gone now. I'll never know those answers to. Okay. But my mom and dad were always honest about the questions we asked. They didn't make something up, but they made it age appropriate. But you want to make sure you age it honestly, because if you lie about it, it's going to come back and bite you in the rear end, whether when they get older, or maybe they found something out and they're fishing to see what kind of answer you give them an honest, age appropriate answer. That they are able to participate in family grieving. You have to grieve together as a family. And a lot of times it might start with you, Dad, talking about how you're feeling about mom not being around, or your ex-spouse not being around, or being deployed, or have been arrested and put into jail, or passed away. You need to allow your children to grieve with you. And your kids are always watching you. So let it start with you. And you know what? If you get emotional, while it might not be the manly thing to do, it's the appropriate thing to do. Because if your kids see that you're crying, then they understand it's okay for them to cry. When my mom did that whole popcorn thing with us, she had a box of Kleenex there because she didn't know what to expect. And as discussions went from popcorn to just sitting at the dining room table to just having a discussion about it, sometimes that Kleenex box always wound up as part of that discussion. So if you're willing to discuss things about how you're thinking and feeling, your children are going to reciprocate. And it might not be right away. A lot of times you'll just get a lot of blank stares, stare in the TV, stare at the wall, shrug shoulders, but it's not that they're not hearing you. So dads, don't think it's a waste of your time. You just got to keep nurturing it. There is a comfortable presence of an adult whom they can rely on. And that's what happens with consistent parenting. If they know what is right and what is wrong, and there's no deviation, there's stability being shown there. That even though your ex-spouse, or they read something on the internet or saw a video, shows something that they don't, why is this parent doing this? But they go to your house and know it's consistent. They know that they feel secure. A quick example of that, I was a single dad, Tommy was seeing me about every other weekend. I get a phone call from his mother saying they're out of power because of the storm. Could you come get them? Because we don't know when we're going to have power. So I picked him up and came home, and he took a shower and, got him situated and figured he was going to be with me a couple of weeks. And he said, Dad, can I stay with you for a while? And I said, well, why? It's like, well, we haven't been with power for over a month. So clearly there were other circumstances going on, but I somehow missed it. But my son felt secure enough to ask if he could stay, because he felt that that I presented enough stability that he knew he could ask that for me. Because his mother was going through a financial issue where he didn't know when the lights would be turned off next, or when the water would stop working, or what all that. But when he would come to me, and in the early days of cable TV, cable used to go out on a regular basis. So the cable would go out. He'd look at me and go, did you pay the bill? What do you mean, did I pay the bill? Yeah, I paid the bill. Cable goes out. And I would have to call that 888 number and let him listen to the message that there was a cable outage in the area. I was in a new subdivision being built, and occasionally power would go out as they hooked power to the next building. And if he was home with that, he would say, did you pay the electric bill? So I finally had to say to him, I said, you let me worry about the food, the bills, the house, the clothes, the air conditioning, the heat. You worry about school, you worry about yourself. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but you don't need to worry about it. And if I can't afford something, I'll tell you that I can't afford something. I created a sense of comfortable presence and stability that he knew he could trust. Okay. An absent dad, a dad who's not around, will hinder everything we just talked about. Doesn't have a sense of comfortability. Apparently, my son asked his mother at one time if he could move in with me, when we turned 16. And she called me and said, I want you to tell him that he can't move in with you until you're 18. I said, I'm not going to do that. Well, I don't want him moving in with you. I said, I am not going to tell my son that if he feels he needs to live with me for a reason, whatever that reason is, that he can't do it until he's 18. Because I just removed that level of stability and removed that comfortability if I were to do that. So an absent dad who's not around hinders that whole thing we just talked about. Remember always you're the parent first. That's first and foremost, that's your responsibility. Communicate on a regular basis, even if they don't want to communicate with you. Boundaries and rules need to exist. They may not agree, but they're not going to stop loving you because you're going to make them take out the trash. They're not going to stop loving you because you won't let them stay out past 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, or stay up all night, or won't let them watch an R-rated movie because they're 10 years old. They might not be happy with you, but they're not going to stop loving you. With modern day technology, find out their school schedule. Being a proactive single dad, especially if you're not living with your kids, you need to know their schedule. Do not rely on your children, and do not rely on your ex-spouse to get you that information. Go online. Everything's online now. You can get everything online. How many times as we were kids, we tell our parents, oh, I forgot I got a game tomorrow. Oh, I forgot, I've got a graduation meeting that you have to be at tomorrow. Now that there's no excuse for that anymore. Single dads, make sure the school has all the necessary paperwork to show that you're entitled to that information. Sometimes divorce decrees, depending on the circumstances of the divorce, prevent the father from being shown up to school, preventing them to get the information for the kids, about their kids, go to meetings and stuff. So make sure you have the documentation needed to show that you're entitled to that information. Don't assume your ex-spouse is going to give the school that information. You make sure they get it. I would personally physically walk in there, introduce yourself, give them copies of the paperwork to show that you are to have access to the grades, meetings, communications, newsletters, whatever it is. If your child is in a sport, make sure you have that schedule. Don't rely on your children because they're not always going to remind you, and don't rely on your ex-spouse. Okay. Consistent parenting will always override inconsistent parenting. Might not happen overnight, but it will happen. Lastly, for dads, we got a few minutes left. Some choices are directed for us. Other choices are solely ours to make. Your choices don't only impact you, they also impact the closest to you, your children and your family. My grandmother used to always say, don't do anything you don't want published on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. Remember, your kids are always watching. It's not your child's fault that their parents are not together. It's not their fault. So anything worth doing takes hard work. And yes, single dads, it's hard work. But just like your job, just like if you went to college or working your way up the corporate ladder, single parenting is hard work, but the results in the long run are worth it. The relationship I have with my son is better than it ever has been. But I'll be honest with you, apparently, occasionally he'll come up with questions regarding what happened between his mom and I. And I try and answer them as honestly as I can, not necessarily giving him all the information he wants, but to get the questions answered. With younger kids, sometimes it's something as simple as, well, mommy and daddy don't have the special love it takes to be married anymore. Sometimes that's all you need, and they're okay with that until they get to the next level. Sometimes if mom has passed away or has been deployed or incarcerated, you come up with just a simple age-appropriate response. We're faced with some choices. We can be active in our children's lives, or we can be absent in our children's lives. Neither one of those choices is easy, but both have an impact. Which impact do you want? Which impact do you want? Because they're both going to be hard and they're both going to have consequences. But which one do you want? Okay, remember, Dad, your choices are always being watched. positive or negative, at times children tend to take responsibility for your choices. So my dad stopped calling over 6 months. I said, what did I do wrong? What did I do to get my dad mad? Did I do something wrong? Did I forget to call him? I took responsibility for his choice. It's unrealistic. And as an adult, you can say that's unrealistic, but to a child, it's not. Give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to grieve. Give yourself permission to say, I'm entitled to be with my children more often. Give yourself permission to do what you need to do to be a parent. Here's just, you can give yourself permission that you can grieve. You understand how the grieving process works, and it takes as long as it takes. Seek support for yourself and your children to heal together. Rebuilding your family takes time. Don't rush it. And I don't want to get into, there's tons of ways you can do that. Never talk negatively about that ex or step parent, no matter what. Okay, we're pretty much rounding the corner on this. We're just about out of time. I put some resources out there. There's an organization that I'm on the advisory board called Rainbows for All Children. It's a peer support program that's free to all the participants, usually in schools or other types of community type settings. I put the website up there, forfathers.org, the Love and Logic Institute on Parenting. My website, you can go there at any time, email me, look at some of the articles that I've written. There's a book out there called Healing the Hurt, Restoring the Hope. It was written over 10 years ago, but it gives a great perspective on how to understand what you and your children are going through as you're grieving. And just some of the bibliography stuff of the information that I had from there. Let's see if my mouse will now work. I don't know why it's not wanting to work. Let's try this instead. There we go. Thank you very much for attending.